wake up, it's the morning. Wake up, the day is dawning. Wake up, it's time to start the day. So everybody's gotta wake up, wake up, wake up. It's the morning. Wake up, the day is dawning. Wake up, it's time to spill some tea. So everybody's gotta wake up, wake up.
Hi everybody, welcome to Wake Up with T. Oliver. I'm T. Oliver Reed, your host, and yes, you have seen me in multiple Tony Award-winning musicals on Broadway, but now you get to see me sit down virtually with friends, peers, and colleagues while we discuss Broadway, life, and beyond. So let's get to talking. Episode 6. He's just a Broadway baby.
It's my world that I want to have a little pride in, my world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say, hey world, I am what I am.
This man needs no introduction. He is Mr. Broadway himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Leroy Reams. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a true Broadway legend and just an incredible man, Leroy Reams. Leroy, how are you?
Well, I'm doing as well as expected, as the old adage goes, satisfactory.
Satisfactory is more than enough. You look great.
Satisfactory.
So my plan for this was really just to say, he's like, Leroy Reams, go, because you are truly the greatest storyteller of many generations. You have had an incredible career. Let me talk about you for a second. So you graduated from Conservatory of Music at Cincinnati, but your Broadway debut was in Sweet Charity in 1966. You were a Tony Drama Desk Award nominee for 42nd Street.
Yeah.
You've appeared on cabaret stages. You've directed. You've been in shows. You've done just about everything with just about everybody.
Thank you.
First of all, how has, before the pandemic, how has Broadway changed from when you first came to New York to the time to, say, January of 2020?
Well, it's constantly changing because the people are changing.
Mm-hmm.
It goes along and the people die and new people take their places. Mm-hmm. And the world changes and the art that we practice changes because of the people who are creating it. Uh-huh. And the music has changed. The attitudes have changed. And some for the better, some for the worst, which is true with everything. There's good and there's bad, and it's just different, that's all. And it's interesting to be defined as being of your generation, but we are, and that stays with us. And, having been with some people who are now called geniuses, was very exciting, and that was my period, and those were the people, and that's what I relate to. And I am lucky to be on the Chita Rivera selection committee, the awards, and I get to see all the shows that have choreography. So I go to a lot of theater that I normally wouldn't necessarily go to, that if I didn't think I wanted to see it. But it's interesting because then I do get a better judgment of what's happening. Mm-hmm. And the thing that is amazing to me are the talents that are working. Mm-hmm. Everyone does everything now. They sing, they dance, they act, they play a musical instrument, they move the sets. If David Merrick were alive, he'd have him cleaning the theater, selling the tickets. Uh-huh. It's just incredible, the talented people. And in the ensemble, mm-hmm. There was a time when all the girls were tall and gorgeous, and the chorus boys were all young and good looking, and now they're of all shapes and sizes because they have to play all the parts because there's not enough money to have a big cast. Mm-hmm. They have to do so much, so they're doing so much more for the same money. Mm-hmm. And the casts are much smaller, so they have to be more versatile. So it's amazing to me. As a matter of fact, with the Cheetah Awards, I insisted that we have an ensemble award because the kids are so incredible that I said they have to be recognized because of all the things they do. Mm-hmm. And they're singing and dancing and acting all at the same time. I'm a huge pusher of the talent that's around nowadays.
Do you, because it's been a conversation, in dressing rooms over the years, is like, is do you ever wish that the Tony Awards would offer some type of, best ensemble award, or at
Yeah,
least at least an honor, just the certificate, so that
yeah.
the people who are in the shows actually get.
And so much has changed with the fact that when I came to New York, well, like with Cheetah and with Gwen Verdon and all of the wonderful geniuses that I've worked with, we all came and we started out in the chorus,
Mhm.
not the ensemble. It was the chorus.
Yeah.
And we worked our way up through the ranks. Donna McKechnie and I did not start out at the same time because I went to college first and she didn't, but we're of the same age and period. And our careers are very similar in how we navigated our ways from being in the ensemble chorus
Mhm.
to going into principal roles. But I trained to be a principal actor. I studied at a major conservatory and I studied dance and voice and acting and all of this stuff. So when I came to New York and I graduated from college, I was basically a working professional.
Uh-huh.
I had my actor's equity card because between my freshman and sophomore year in college, I did summer stock
Nice.
and met a lot of wonderful people and did some roles. And then when I graduated, I had my card and also a lot of experience because I had a wonderful professor at school who gave me lots of responsibility. And my senior year at school, I basically did all the shows. I directed them, I choreographed them, I starred in them. And it was wonderful because it was a training that when I came to New York, I was ready to work. And I had the facility and I had the experience. So at my first audition, you pick up the newspaper. I had $500 in my pocket because after graduating, I had to make money to come to New York. Yeah. And I worked as a piping contractor secretary until I fucked up his book so badly he fired me. And then I became an English teacher in junior high, not a substitute English teacher because I wouldn't sign for a year. Because as soon as I had the money, I was going to New York, and that's what happened. Right. And my professor drove me to New York so I didn't have to pay airfare or bus fare. And I had $500, and I stayed with my friend from college, Marcia Lewis, who was a working nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital. I stayed with her in her apartment, and she had a roommate because of the hospital. It was illegal, but we did it. Uh-huh. And I picked up the backstage showbiz magazines looking for the casting. Went to the audition for the Juliet Prowse nightclub act. They only needed one dancer, and you had to, be a certain height and all of this and that, and I got it. And that started me on the road. And Juliet Prowse, who remained a friend for life, I love so dearly. I miss her every moment of my life. And I started out with just the best way and also a big salary. Mm-hmm. And because, I thought I was being so clever when Juliet's manager at the first audition, it's a good story, kept looking at me going, I thought, my God, my first audition, I'm going to have to put out to get the job. And maybe a little uncomfortable. And he was a good-looking man. I mean, I wasn't insulted. And so at the callback, Ernie Flatt was the choreographer, and they told us at the audition that those of us who were called back, be prepared to spend the day rehearsing because you'll start right into rehearsal. And only two of us were called back, and the other boy was taller. So I thought, he's going to get up because Julia was tall, especially in those high heels that she danced in. But they chose me. And then her manager, Mark Mardo, who's a very nice guy, and asked Julia if he could take me out to breakfast. And I thought, this is, going to be the approach. And then I thought, also he thinks he's going to get me for a cheap price because I knew that, the working salary on Broadway was $125 a week. Mm-hmm. So I thought, he's not going to get me for less than that. I'll show him. So we went out to breakfast. As soon as we sat down to eat, he started eating. I knew he wasn't gay. So I was saved by that. And then he said, we start you out at $350 a week. And when we get to Vegas, you'll be making $400 and we take care of all your expenses. So, my mouth was just dropped open. I immediately called my mother and said, Mother, you won't believe this. I'm being paid this much money to be dancing. And Juliet, most of the time we went out after the show and she always picked up the check. Mm-hmm. She was so generous and so lovely. And I'm blessed to have had that as my stepping stone. And then through Juliet, of course, I met all the choreographers.
Mhm.
And then when the act was over, I went back to New York, picked up the newspaper, next audition, Sweet Charity.
Yeah.
And I made it. Bob Fosse was not in love with me at the audition because I wore ballet tights,
Uh-huh.
because you couldn't buy dance pants back then. They didn't make them.
Yeah.
And the dancers made them for one another.
Uh-huh.
And so, I wore ballet tights. And of course, Fosse looked at me thinking I was a ballet dancer, didn't pay much attention. But Gwen watched me.
Mhm.
She had her eye on me. And then when we sang, of course, in those days, the people in the dance ensemble didn't sing really.
Mhm.
So, and I was a trained singer. So when I sang, I saw Cy Coleman jump up and run over
Uh-huh.
Fosse, and so that's when it happened.
When you came to New York, there weren't many men or women, boys or girls who could sing as well as they could dance, or
Yeah, not as well. Yes, the singers sang and they danced a little, and the dancers danced and sung a little.
uh-huh.
And you basically got in by having that as an added. Of course, then we also weren't mic'd. There were microphones in the floor and in the ceiling, but no one wore body mics except in Sweet Charity. Gwen did,
Mhm.
and she was the first star that I knew of who actually wore a mic.
Yeah.
And it was put up into her head,
Uh-huh.
in her little thing that she wore, and that's the first time that people, started using sound, and it was really quite wonderful. But then Fosse kept me till the end of the audition. I'm sorry about my phone answering, darling, but that's what it is.
It's okay.
So I was given this little part to read called Young Spanish Man.
Uh-huh.
And I think it was Fosse's way of getting rid of me because, but he didn't realize that I had Spanish 101 in college. And also Miguel Hadro, who was reading opposite, it was between the two of us. And of course he was Puerto Rican. My speech was better and I could do señorita, señorita. So I had a better accent that would be understandable, and Miguel wasn't as good a speaker. So I got the part. It was just a small part, but that's what put me into the show, and it was really wonderful.
And
really
you're from Kentucky, so had you been acting and singing and dancing and all that as a child, and that's what got you to?
Listen, I started whenever there was music on, I sang and I danced in the middle of the floor. That's why my mother sent me to dancing school.
Uh-huh.
I mean, this is a story. She read in the paper that the local dance school gave you a free pair of tap shoes and a promise you'd be in the recital. So she took me up and I went into dancing school. I was like, around 6 years old, about that age, but I just did it naturally. It was in my DNA. I would get in the middle of the floor and sing and dance whenever music was on and show off. And I'm the youngest of 7, as my mother always said. I had 3 boys, 3 girls, and Leroy. Because I was the baby.
Uh-huh.
And, but my sister, I know, once dressed me up in a sailor outfit and sent me out at a bridal shower for a friend of hers, and her to-be husband was in the Marines.
Mhm.
And I came in with a big sack on my back, and I said, the Marines have landed and the situation is well in hand. They all screamed and clapped. Of course, I was dressed as a sailor, which made no sense. But anyway, that applause and that attention was just something that was necessary for me. And the first dance teacher I had, was a school that they had a sign that said, tap-toe ballet, acrobatic baton, ballroom, voice, personality, and culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the sign said. So did all the stuff there in school. And then the guy didn't teach, the owner of the school, his name was Jules Stein. The younger girls taught the kids, And then at the end of that recital that year, he hung himself. And so he didn't have a school, the next year on, but there was another dance teacher who was 18 years old, Bob Ziegler, in Covington, and he opened a school and I went there. Then he was drafted and his teacher came in to take over the school, and she had blonde hair and her name was Alma Tranter, and she was just terrific and I loved her. Uh-huh. And she took a liking to me, and she told my mother, she said, he's got it. He can make a living doing this. He's got the talent. And that was the first validation I had. Mm-hmm. And she gave me a solo number in the recital that year. And we didn't have money to pay for private lessons, but she taught me free of charge. So that was my inspiration. And then I went through the ranks of Cincinnati, Ohio, Covington, Kentucky, working with all the dance schools, going to the different teachers, getting, performing in the local. There was the Newport, Kentucky Catholic Actors Guild, and they did Finian's Rainbow that year, and I danced in the chorus. So I took advantage of everything that was around there. And of course, thank God, the University of Cincinnati at that time had a theater arts major. But I danced with the Cincinnati Zoo Opera Ballet when I graduated from high school, and then I was getting ready to go to the university, and in the fall, but I auditioned for the ballet, and I got accepted. And one of the girls in the chorus was named Susie Ficker, who was a couple years younger, and of course she became Suzanne Farrell.
Oh, wow.
So we became friends that summer, and her sister Donna was the dance captain. So Susie said, "How would you like to come to the conservatory and take lessons with my teacher?" I said, "I can't afford it. I don't have the money." She said, "I can get you a scholarship." I said, "Well, what do I have to do? Do I have to audition?" "No, Marion LaCour, who was the teacher, comes to the opera, and we'll point you out to her." And she came, and she liked me, and I got a scholarship for ballet training. And then I studied voice at the College Conservatory of Music, but it was a separate school then. So then my junior year at the university, CCM joined the faculty. And so I graduated as a arts and sciences college, but then my master's and my honorary doctorate was through CCM. So I wasn't, as a matter of fact, the first student who was a theater arts major was Pamela Myers.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's how it worked. But then I am considered a CCM graduate because of, my master's and my doctorate. And that's what I'm considered. But actually, I was a theater arts major. And it's a wonderful program. And I wish it had been in charge. But I had my outlets. We did musicals at the university. And I, worked with a symphony in Cincinnati and all the stuff I'm a product of the arts of Cincinnati, Ohio. And I was experienced as a result of that. So when I came to New York, I was ready to go.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I want to get to some of the geniuses that you've worked with, but you reposted a picture recently of you on a beach with two showgirls, but you covered them up, and there's you and another gentleman, and then the two showgirls. And again, like I've heard this story before, because I think you told it to me. We were doing something at 54 Below, and you mentioned it. But I need you to tell this story.
Well, the guy in the picture was Carmon de Leon, who was now Maestro Carmon de Leon, who was an associate conductor with the Cincinnati Symphony, but he also was conductor of the Middletown Symphony, the Tri-City Symphony, and many others, and he is the conductor of the Cincinnati Ballet. And so he had a very big career in Cincinnati, and we were buddies in college, and he was a French horn player, plus he played the drums. And so when we were looking for a conductor for the senior year production, I recommended Carmen. He started conducting, and then he went into conducting, and of course made his career doing that. And when I was doing Juliet Prowse's nightclub act the second time, because I left, it's a good story, when I left Sweet Charity, I handed in my notice opening night because Juliet asked me to go back and do her act. So I handed in my notice. And Bob Fosse came down in the dressing room and read me the riot act and said, "Who do you think you are? How dare you? You know how many people want to work with me, and you had that in your notice? Now, everyone's going to have to go back into rehearsal to replace you. Just give me one good reason why you're doing this." I said, "Juliet Prowse pays me 3 times what you do." And he laughed like you just did. He said, "I can't argue with that." I said, "Neither can I." So I went back with Juliet. Now, she didn't have a conductor. And I said, "Well, I've got a friend of mine in college, Carmen de Leon, who's wonderful." And Juliet said, "Call him on the phone." So I got him. I said, "Carmen, I have someone here who wants to know." She got on the phone. She said, "Hello, Carmen. This is Juliet Prowse." And of course, he was freaking out on the other end. And she hired him over the phone. And he came out and was her conductor, and she loved him and wanted him to stay with her as her conductor, but he wanted to go back to finish his schooling and get his degrees. And he really wanted to live in Cincinnati. He didn't want to, go into that kind of show business. But one of the guys who was the banquet director, one of the hotels, was married to a showgirl. And then one of the other showgirls went with her husband, and they invited us on their boat at Lake Mead to go out for a day. And of course, the girls were, naked showgirls. So they had to sun themselves without brasiers on because they couldn't have panty lines. So that was the whole thing. So they were actually two married ladies. But we took this picture and I put a U on me and a C on Carmen to say University of Cincinnati, because how funny that they were two naked showgirls.
Yeah.
It was all a pretense.
Huh.
It's really wild. Of course, the anecdote to that is, I won't say which one, but one of the girls' husbands actually put the make on me later. So, there's all sorts of people out there, baby.
There are.
But listen, in those days, honey, we considered it not sexual harassment. We considered it a compliment.
Well, here's the thing, because we talk about, as Brad Musgrove, we were always like, there's no such thing as sexual harassment in theater. It's like we've seen each other naked on so many occasions. Yeah. It's never the cast that has, well, rarely the cast that has issues with anyone, because we've gotten so used to, I'll see you in a G-string, I'll see you with your breast out because I walked into the room before you had your bra on, and those things, and we think nothing of it. It's a part of the business for us.
And most of the guys in the ensemble were gay anyway. If they were straight, they were considered the queers.
Yeah.
That's the way it was. I mean, I used to joke with Don Correa all the time about that. Because we used to say, "Listen, you shut up. You're the queer one in this room."
Did you know Don before he and Sandy got married?
Yeah.
You have all of the stories.
I've danced with most of them. We were a very close group, and because not a lot of there wasn't the quantity of people who do what they do now back then. There were fewer people in show business, especially men who sang and danced, and but now, of course, all shapes and color sizes and nationalities and everything else were such a melting pot now, which is great.
So let's see. I'm just looking at some of the shows you've done. We talked a little bit about Sweet Charity and Bob Fosse and Gwen Verdon. Applause with Lauren Bacall.
Yes.
How was that?
Well, it was great. I mean, it's a long story. I could talk a lot about it, but Ron Field was the director choreographer. And to make a longer story longer, we'll have to do this in segments now, honey. This is just the first one. But my first meeting with Ron Field, he came out to California and was looking for one male dancer for something that he was doing. And three of us were called in. And I wore a rugby shirt, blue and red stripe with a white collar. And I had blue dance pants and white jazz shoes. And after the audition, and I'm not bragging, but I was the better of the three dancers, and I knew it. They were all friends, but I was the better dancer. And I wasn't picked. And then later, I was doing a television special with Sid Charisse. And Tony Sharmley, who was the choreographer, had a party at the premiere. And Ron Field was at that party. And after watching the show, he said, "I owe you an apology." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "I didn't know who you were at that audition because you had on that outfit. And I just thought you looked like a fucking American flag." And I said, "Well, God forbid if you thought I could dance." I thought, "Fuck you, honey. I can work for other people. You're not the only person in the world, So that was not a good thing. Then fade out. Then a couple years later, Gwen Verdon asked for me to dance with her on an Ed Sullivan show. And Ron Field was the choreographer. And I couldn't go to the first day of rehearsal because I had another job. And they said, "No, it's okay. They'll work it out." So I came the second day of rehearsal, and Ron had done this Jack Cole takeoff number with East Indian, because he had studied that, and the other guys had too, and Gwen. I hadn't. So they had already learned the routine the day before, and I said, "Oh my God, you made a mistake. I don't know how to do that." And Gwen said, "Oh, come on, you can do that." I said, "Well, look, I'm here for the day. And so I'll try my best, but at the end, if you don't think I can do it, let me go, and you don't have to pay me. I'm happy about that. I'm just so sorry I didn't know that, or I wouldn't have accepted the job." So we did it, and then of course at the end of the rehearsal, Ron said, "I'd like to see a run through of the number now," and of course I made some mistakes. And after it was over, Ron said, "Leroy," I said, "Ron, I know the mistakes I made. It's just foreign to my body." But I said, I can learn this. I didn't think I could, but I can. Just have to be a little patient with it. He said, oh, isn't it wonderful? Leroy Reams can do anything. He's so good. Nothing ever phases him. Well, we were all just dumbfounded. And Gwen looked at me and said, tell him you won't do it. And he stormed out of the room and slammed the door. And that's how we finished out the week. It was a little cool. And then Gwen said, I'm not going to have him talk to you like that. And the number came off fine. Not a great number, but it came off fine. And so then when I got the call for applause, I thought, well, Ron Field again. So I went, and it went well. And then my agent called and said, they liked you very much. We think they're going to make an offer. And so I went to a party that night, and Tony Sharmley was at the party. I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I just auditioned for applause, and it went well. And I think maybe, you know, they might make an offer. That's what my agent said. So the next day, my agent called and said, what are you spreading around town? You're doing applause. Well, you didn't get it. I said, well, first of all, I wasn't spreading it around town. I was at a party, and the only person I talked to was Tony Sharmley. I don't know how that conversation got screwed up. But he said, well, you don't have the part. So Juliet called for me to come back and do her act for the third time, but I had already done Oklahoma at Lincoln Center by this time, so I didn't want to go back in the ensemble. But I like money and I like to work. So I was very depressed, and Bob Donahoe, who became my husband, we were together for 50 years. We were living together then, and I decided not to go back and do Juliet's act because it was a step backwards. And I was very depressed. It was New Year's Eve. And I told Bob, he got a bottle of champagne for me. He was so good. And I said, I should have had that part. I should have played that role. And the next day the phone rang. They fired Garrett Lewis, who had the part, and hired me. But Bob was writing down furiously because the money wasn't that good, because they were having to pay off Garrett because he had a year's contract. So Bob kept writing down, take the job. And I took the job, and I said, only for 6 months, starting first day of rehearsal. So then I could get out of the contract because they didn't give me the money. And of course, it all worked out that, you know, the show was a hit and they gave me the money later and all of that. And then I became very, very close friends with Bacall, which happened my first day of rehearsal. So when I went to rehearsal, I also said I wouldn't start rehearsal without a signed contract because Ron, you know, I had a history with him, which wasn't good. So I came, and Ron apologized again and threw a script at me, and they were almost into run-through situations.
Wow, okay.
So I was having to learn all this stuff the first day. So I was introduced, they threw a script at me, and Ron said, in the first scene, you walk in and you go through the door and you go and you stand by the closet. And then you have a line at the end of the scene. And I'm struggling through the script. And so I said, okay, so when I come in, since they don't know who I am, can I carry a fall and be brushing it and like put it down? And then I said to Miss Bacall, I'll touch her hair. I won't touch her hair, but I'll pretend, you know, so they'll know what I'm doing. And she said, my friends call me Betty. And I said, Betty? And she said, that's better. So I remember when I stood by the closet, and the scene went on, and they were fixing things. And suddenly I raised my hand. I said, excuse me, when does this character get out of the closet? Well, she laughed, and that was it. I'm telling you, it's like I knew her in a former life. From that moment on, Lauren Bacall and I were like this. And we got out of town, and I went and had dinner with her. And I was there with the Lynn Carreyrou affair, and the three of us would go out. And I know the first night that we were all together, we came back in her limousine, of course, and I got out of the car and I said, wait till the kids hear about this tomorrow, meaning me being driven home in a limousine. Yeah. That was my intent. So the next day I go to the theater, Betty said, you sly puss. I said, what? She said, what? You know what I'm talking about. Why do you know what's going on between me and Len? Why do you think I let you join us? Well, I didn't know. But I thought, well, if she thought I did, I'll pretend. But we became the characters in the show off the stage. And it was really a wonderful, wonderful time. I loved her because I got to know and work with Lauren Bacall, but I knew Betty Persky. You know, that's the person I was with. And we got out of town. We spent a lot of time together. We came back into town, and I noticed that the Palace Theater in those days had an L-shaped alley. So you entered the stage door on the inside of the building. Now it's on the outside, but it wasn't then.
Yeah.
And people would get in there at night, and when she would leave, there were all these people. She always signed autographs. She was very good about that, but it was a little dangerous. And I said, Betty, you shouldn't be going out alone. She said, what am I going to do? The doorman's certainly not going to escort me, and the stage manager's out of here as soon as the curtain hits up. I said, well, I'll walk you. She said, you'll do that? I said, of course I'll do that. So she said, well, then I'll drive you home. Well, hey, that's not a bad exchange. So I would go down after the show into her dressing room, and I got to meet all these famous people. We always had a drink. And then I would take her to her car and get a ride home. And then when she was going to go out with someone, we would have an understanding that I would politely say goodnight to knowing that she was taken care of. So that's the kind of relationship we had.
Now,
And
were you living in Midtown at that point, or where?
I had an apartment uptown at 93rd in Amsterdam.
Okay.
A wonderful apartment with a big sunken living room, and it belonged to Dottie Danner, who was then Dorothy Franks, and Walter Painter's wife, Charlene Painter, but it was Charlene Mell back then, I think was her maiden name. And they had the apartment, but they were always subletting it because Dottie got married and was living in the other part of the building, and Charlene was in California with Walter. So the guy came up to the door one day, and I looked down at him, and he said, who are you? And I said, well, who are you? He said, I am the manager of the building, and you shouldn't be in this apartment. These girls are always subletting to people. And I said, well, and he said, so if you want this apartment, I'll raise the rent and I'll give you this apartment. I said, well, I can't do that unless I talk to the girls. So they said, look, we got caught, so that's all right, take the apartment. The rent was raised, it was $148 a month. It was a one-bedroom with a huge sunken living room with an upper area that I turned into a bar, and the other area was my dining room on the upper level, a galley kitchen, lots of closet, fabulous apartment. The walls were very, smooth and had beautiful oak floors. I was so lucky. I had that great apartment, but that's where I lived at 93rd in Amsterdam. And then after that, Bob and I bought a brownstone, which I'm in as we speak.
Oh,
so,
and I'm just looking at your stairwell from behind you. It's gorgeous.
yeah.
At some point, I'll bring over a bottle of champagne if you'll have me once we're doing this done.
Yes,
with the pandemic,
yes, and we'll have cocktails, and I'll tell you a few.
Yeah. Okay, so because we're not done yet.
But applause. That's what started the big thing, and I met all these wonderful people, and Bacall had them sign my poster, and it was I was in heaven, and then. Ann Baxter took over the role, and I loved her. We had a great time together, and applause was again another stepping stone. I was asked to go to London to do the London production, but my agent then was also Bacall's agent because I had him as an agent because of her. And he didn't want Betty to know, and I was not to tell her. He didn't want me to do the role in London. He wanted me to do something else because it was the stigmata of playing a homosexual. And it was a big deal back then. I didn't think of it that way. I truly didn't. I mean, my agent did tell me at the time, you have to be careful playing a homosexual, you'll get typecast. Yeah. He said, but I'm an actor. What has that got to do with it? And besides that, I am a homosexual. Why wouldn't I play a homosexual? And also Ron didn't want the part done with an effeminate quality. He wanted him as a real person. And that's the way I played it. I mean, I had to give him a little bit of flair to get the laughs and get the jokes, but it wasn't done in that stereotypical thing. It wasn't. And I think that's why it works so well. And I know when we went out of town in Baltimore and the gay bar scene happened, and of course, the line in the show, Margot Channing says to Dwayne Fox, how would you like to take two lonely ladies out on the town tonight? And he said, oh, I can't, I've got a date. She said, bring them along. Well, that was the outage.
Yeah.
And the audience gasped, by the way. And we went into the gay bar scene. Their mouths were open. Mm-hmm. And of course, as I made my entrance, I walked up to one of the guys who was supposedly my date, and I gave him a kiss on the mouth, like that. The audience went, and from that, we didn't get a laugh. It was the audience was so shocked. Wow. And of course, next day in rehearsal, Ron said, Leroy, I said, I know, cut the kiss. So the joke became I came in and I hugged him. And then when I introduced him to Margot Channing, he put out his hand and she shook his hand. That was supposed to be the joke. And but it was a big deal with that gay bar scene, and I didn't know it at the time. Also working at that theater was Frank Rich.
Really?
Yeah, he was there working, I think, in the box office. I thought he was an usher, but I think it was the box office. And years later, when I met Frank, I said, well, now the name has a face. He said, well, and I thanked him for the kind things he said in the past. And he said, well, I've always had a special place for you because, and he told me about working at the Morris Mechanic Theater. And he still enjoyed applause. And so that was the connection. And how small the world and 6 degrees of separation, how we all become. But applause was a huge part of my life, and the friendship with Betty lasted till her death. I'm a lucky guy.
Figure out what the issues were with Ron Fields, though, from the first audition.
Well, I think that what Ron thought, and I'm second guessing, I really don't know, we never discussed it. I think the reason he cast Garrett Lewis, because Garrett was a tall, good-looking guy and rather straight looking. You know, he looked like he would have been the leading man. And the piece, and of course, Lynn Carey was not your typical leading man. You know, not the big handsome, you know, and brilliant actor though. And there's a reason why Betty fell in love with him, because he's a wonderful guy and I love him to death, and we're still close friends. And I think that was, but then it wasn't working out in the piece. Garrett was just it wasn't funny enough, and he wasn't really the dancer that I was. And they realized it wasn't working, and the humor wasn't working. And so that's what made the change.
All right. So listen, we're going to skip over a couple of shows because you have to come back, because again, this is the reason I want to talk to you, because there's so many stories. There's so much knowledge of this business and on a personal level that you have that I just think everybody needs to know. But I just want to talk a little bit about the show that you were Tony nominated for, 42nd Street.
Yes. Well,
how was that?
Well, Mike Stewart, I had done the first revival of Hello, Dolly with Carol Channing, and became friendly with Michael Stewart, who wrote the book, of course, The 42nd Street and Hello, Dolly. And Mike told me he was doing a musical of 42nd Street. And I said, well, I'm very good for the Dick Powell part. Mike, I'd like to get a crack at that. I didn't hear from him for a year or two after that. But then I got a call to audition. And so my agent's secretary called and said, you got an audition? I said, fine. I said, so what's the role? She said, Andy Lee. And I said, is that the Dick Powell part? She said, no, they think you're too old for that part. They want you to audition for the choreographer, who's about 40 and a little on the tough side. I said, well, that's not me. And so again, Bob is in the background, take the audition, writing on the tablet. So I took the audition, and Bob said, just go in and audition for the part you want to do. Just go in and present yourself, which was very good advice. So I got my accompanist, and at the audition, I said, now when we get out on stage, I'll do my up tune. Don't wait for them to ask for a ballad. Go right into the ballad. And Tony Kaye, a wonderful girlfriend of mine from LA, who's a brilliant dancer, we had just done a show together that I choreographed, and she was in town. So Tony walked out on stage and we did a tap dance together. And I put on a show. Up tune right into the ballad. She came out and we did the tap, and and this is a true story, dead silence. You know, like Springtime for Hitler. And coming down the aisle, because in those days we auditioned in theaters, big difference. That's one thing wrong with auditioning now. We don't audition in theaters.
That's what asking, like, I mean, how is that to be on the stage and doing the audition? Because now we're in rehearsal studios.
Right. Small rooms. Yeah. Small rooms, so they want everything intimate. We rehearse in small rooms. Then we get on the stage, and it's a whole different, we're losing our technique because of that, seriously. And also by being microphone, people are whispering now instead of speaking well so you can understand. You just have to heighten it. So we're losing the theatricality in our performances now because of those reasons. But anyway, so Gower's coming down the aisle, and he called me to the front of the stage, and I went up and looked over, and he said, you're not right for the role of Andy Lee. And I said, yes, I know that. He said, "You're very right for Billy Lawler." And I said, "Yes, I am. I got it." And I knew I had it. And then, but Gower was famous, for changing his mind. Like Mac and Maybe, because they replaced it so many times. And he called me back for another audition. And my agent then said, well, now, and I thought, well, now I'm going to have to compete with everybody else. But it wasn't. At the second audition, he said, I want you to do everything you did before so I can see you again because I'm getting ready to pick Peggy Sawyer. So I thought, I do have it.
Yeah.
And then third time, they called and they said, he wants you to come in and rehearse. He's got a girl that he wants to use, and he wants you to come in and work with her. I still didn't have a signed contract. And my agent said, you shouldn't do this. I said, I'm not insecure. I know I've got the part. I know it's my part. So I went in and auditioned with Lisa Brown, and Randy Skinner and Karen Baker, the two dance assistants, were there. And we rehearsed with her. And at the end, Gower said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I adore her. I think she's funny. I think she's quirky. And I think she has the personality for the character. And Karen said, well, she's not a very good tap dancer. And Gower cast her. And the weekend before she was supposed to go down to sign her contract, they had an open call, and Wanda Richard was at that open call. And Gower said, let's keep her after and see if she could be an understudy. And he read her and he liked her. And Karen was, it's not that Lisa could tap dance, but Wanda was really a wonderful dancer. And that's what appealed to Gower, and he changed his mind. And Lisa had left her soap opera and handed in her notice at Best Little Whorehouse, where she was working, but she didn't have the signed contract and she had no legal recourse. But the happy story is she replaced Wanda when Wanda left the show. So Lisa got to do the character, and she was wonderful. I mean, all due respect, Wanda Richard was a absolute delight to dance with. One of my happy times because she was a brilliant dancer. And Karen Prunzik, who played Anytime, and they were incredible dancers. And, that's the way that it works. And of course, then the affair with Wanda and Gower, you gotta live through all that. That's a show. That's a show that we need to talk about.
That's gonna be in part 2 of this.
Yes. And that's how 42nd Street happened.
That's amazing. So my last question for part 1 of Me and Leroy Reams, what was it like? What was it like having an impresario, a one producer on a show like David Merrick? I mean, because nowadays there are 25 producers on a show to make it happen, but to have one man who was really in control of everything, what was that like for you?
Well, it was wonderful because I liked David Merrick and he liked me, and it was a wonderful relationship. And it also made it easier in the fact that we only had one man to deal with. But David was also not easy, And I know that Gower told me that when he was offered this show, his people said you shouldn't do this because he had not had always a good record with David, and David could be difficult. And Gower was ill. He told us he had an anemic blood condition. We didn't understand what it was, but he looked so good and, was working. So we didn't think, anything about it, that it was as bad as it was. It was like a leukemia of the blood. Waldenstrom's disease is what it was called. I don't know if they still call it that or not, but, and he would go in for a blood transfusion once in a while. And, but he said that his managers said, you shouldn't do the show because of the stress of David Merrick. But Gower had a very strong contract. Where David couldn't come to rehearsals unless Gower said he could attend. But then once the show started playing previews, David could take the reins because he was the producer. So he could do what he wanted to at that point. But and also David did have one other investor. And when we opened in Washington, the show got mixed reviews. And David told the investor, he said, look, this show may not make it, so I'll buy you out. I'll give you back your investment. So he was one singular producer. And the show was, of course, an enormous hit. And at one point, David made the front page of Variety. He had the biggest residual from producing in the history of the theater, because he had like 3 companies running, and he was clearing like $1 million a week. So he was quite brilliant, knowing what he was doing. And of course, that whole thing of opening night, so many people said, how horrible that he came out and you all had to be on stage and be that around. I said, no, it was brilliant because David used it to his advantage. And so the reviews became reported stories about that historic opening night. And we did not know that Gower had died. We knew he was in the hospital. We knew that it was serious, but we didn't know he had died. And that day, we got a call to come to the theater. My God, we had limousines, people out of town. What do you mean? We've been rehearsing this show for a week in New York. We were to have opened the 1st of August. We didn't open until the 25th. And we used to do complete run-throughs with no one in the audience but David Merrick with full costume, full sets, and full orchestra. We were desperate for an audience. Yeah. So when David walked out on stage that night, I thought he was going to say, I want to thank our champion for this wonderful production who couldn't be here tonight. That's what I thought he was going to say. And instead he said, this is tragic. And everyone laughed because we had like 15 curtain calls. Yep. And then he said, no, you don't understand. Our champion died this afternoon. And then he turned up stage and embraced Wanda, and we all just stood there. And Jerry Orbach, God bless him, had the presence of mind to say, bring in the curtain, bring in the curtain. Mm-hmm. And as the curtain hit the stage, I had a flashback. And I remember the conversation I had with Gower about MGM. Mm-hmm. I said, Gower, I was born too late. I should have been at MGM. And he said, well, I know what I was. He said, because I came in at the end of that. Mm-hmm. And he said, because I'm a song and dance man too. And he said, but I'll make a present of you with this show. I'll give you the chance to do all that. And he said, and Leroy, during the 70s, I was trying to be with it. I took the drugs. I went to the discos. I tried to, be with it. And I just had to wake up one day and realize I'm just an old-fashioned song and dance man. So when David offered this show to me, knowing what problems I was going to have with him, I had to do it because I don't want to be remembered as a has-been.
Wow.
I mean, and that's what came in my mind at that moment. And then we all were like, a rerun. We went, and we all got dressed to go to the party. And we go to the Waldorf Astoria, unbelievable. We had a sit-down dinner at the Waldorf because there was only one producer. Amazing. We sat at a table and were served our food. Can you believe that at an opening night party? Usually, you attend the opening night party, there's no food, there's no place to sit because all the backers and all the extra people are there and the cast arrives late. It was just the opposite. When I walked into the Waldorf, the first person who came up to me was Bob Fosse. And Bob Fosse looked at me and said, that son of a bitch. He said, I filmed my own death and all that jazz, and he still had to do me better by doing it on opening night. And we laughed, and I grabbed him and I said, oh, Bobby, I said, if there's a heaven and God was there, he's smiling down tonight. He would have loved hearing you say that. And that was the opening night.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Okay, so seriously, if you don't mind, we're going to do a part 2 of this because I love you,
and I would like to talk about Richard Rodgers and Carol Channing and all that stuff. So let's do it again. And I love talking with you. And this has been so easy because usually there's too many people on these meetings and you can't get to talk or get intimate and tell stories. And this has been a delight. And you're a friend, so it's easy.
And then I think that I think you need to write a book, but I think that everyone needs to hear the stories of how amazing Broadway was and still can be, and to be able to have these relationships as parts of shows and it not feel like it's just work, or I'm just doing it, or just this amount of celebrity, but that you're able to have you built connections and friendships over shows with these people, with so many people.
Well, that's the way that it happens. It's your connection and your friends, and as you go along, and if you're pleasant to work with and people like you, you'll work. Not saying that you don't have to stand up for your rights, but there is a thing about wanting to work with people. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of brilliant careers sabotaged by attitudes. And, that's kind of the way it is. And also, as far as writing a book, I need someone to help me. I wrote down a lot of my memoirs, but writing is different than talking and telling the story, and then also having an objective person get hold of it and cut out the dead wood and get to the heart and then embellish it. So I would need help. So if anyone's watching and knows that person, why,
we're gonna find that person for you for this book. All right.
Yeah.
So thank you, Leroy. We will get to Richard Rodgers and the rest in part 2.
Yes, looking forward.
Wake up, it's the morning. Wake up, the day is dawning. Wake up, it's time to spill the tea. So everybody's gotta wake up, wake up, wake up. It's the morning. Wake up, the day is dawning. Wake up, it's time to spill the tea. So everybody's gotta wake up, wake up.